I sat in the dimly lit room, the soft hum of jazz playing from the speakers, and stared at the picture on my desk. It was one of the few things I'd kept from my life with Sherry. A framed photo of the two of us, taken on the day we got married. We were standing under a small, arching willow tree, her hand wrapped tightly in mine, the sunlight casting a soft glow over her auburn hair. I could still remember the way she looked at me that day, with a mix of love and certainty that I hadn't felt since. That wedding had been perfect. Small, intimate, exactly the way we wanted it. Just a handful of friends, a simple ceremony, and no fuss. It was everything Sherry and I were about. Straightforward, no drama, just love. Now, as I sat preparing for my wedding with Carolyn, the contrast couldn't have been more stark. Carolyn wanted a grand event, a spectacle, as she called it. A wedding with hundreds of guests, extravagant flowers, and a reception that would be talked about for years. It felt so far from who I was, and yet I had agreed. Maybe I just wanted to make her happy. Or maybe I thought that going through the motions would numb the ache that still lingered from losing Sherry. But it wasn't working. If anything, the more we planned, the more I felt like I was betraying Sherry's memory. "Jonathan," Carolyn called from the living room, interrupting my thoughts. I heard her footsteps approaching. "Did you decide on the table settings? I'm thinking we should go with the gold accents, but the silver could be nice too. What do you think?" I sighed quietly before answering, still looking at the photo of Sherry. Whatever you think is best, Carolyn. I'm fine with either." She entered the room, her eyes narrowing as they fell on the photograph in front of me. She said nothing at first, but I could feel the tension rise between us, like an invisible current charging the air. "You're thinking about her again, aren't you?" she asked, her voice tight. I glanced up, meeting her eyes. "It's not like that, Carolyn. It's just, she's a part of me, and she always will be." Carolyn crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I know, but it feels like she's here more than I am sometimes. We're getting married, Jonathan. Shouldn't that be the focus? Us, right now?" "I want it to be," I said, trying to choose my words carefully. "But you knew from the start that Sherry wasn't just some ex. She was my wife. It's not like I can just erase her." She huffed softly, frustration clear in her expression. "I'm not asking you to erase her. But every time we talk about our wedding, it's like you're comparing it to what you had with her. I don't want to compete with a ghost." I set the picture frame down and stood, walking toward her. "It's not a competition, Carolyn. You and I are different. This wedding, it's different. I'm just still figuring out how to balance it all." Carolyn looked down, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "I just don't want to feel like I'm living in her shadow." Her words hung in the air between us, heavier than I expected. I reached for her hand, gently pulling her closer. "You're not. I'm here with you, and I love you, Carolyn. But you have to understand that Sherry was a huge part of my life. That doesn't just go away." She nodded, her expression softening a little. I know. It's just, sometimes it feels like there's 3 of us in this relationship, and I don't know how to make peace with that." I squeezed her hand, unsure of what else to say. How could I expect her to understand when even I hadn't fully figured it out? It wasn't like I could just turn off the part of me that still missed Sherry. And yet, I didn't want to lose Carolyn either. As I stood there, caught between 2 worlds, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. No matter how hard I tried, I might never truly be able to move forward. Sherry's ghost wasn't just a memory. It was something that lingered, unspoken but ever present, influencing every decision I made. "Maybe we just need to slow down a bit," I suggested, my voice low. "Take some time to figure things out before we go ahead with the wedding." Carolyn's eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe, or doubt. "You're not second-guessing this, are you?" "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. "I'm just saying we should make sure we're ready. Both of us." She was quiet for a moment before nodding slowly. Okay. But Jonathan, if we're going to get married, I need to know that you're really with me. Not just because it's what you think you should do, but because it's what you want. I want this, Carolyn, I reassured her, though a part of me wasn't sure if that was entirely true. She gave me a small, hesitant smile, but the tension remained. As she turned to leave the room, her eyes flicked once more to the photo of Sherry, and I knew that no matter how hard I tried, the past would never truly be behind me. As the door clicked shut behind her, I glanced at the photo again. Sherry's smile stared back at me, frozen in time. For the first time, I wondered if I was trying to hold on to something that was long gone, something that was preventing me from fully living in the present. And as the silence filled the room once more, I couldn't help but feel like I was trapped between two lives, neither of which truly felt like my own anymore. In the whirlwind of wedding planning, the apartment we shared felt less like a home and more like a project management office. Carolyn, fueled by a stack of bridal magazines and an unending stream of Pinterest boards, meticulously plotted out every detail of our upcoming wedding. Each decision, whether significant or minor, seemed to widen the gap between us, between my desires and her expectations. One evening, I sat slumped on our plush cream sofa, laptop open but mostly ignored. Carolyn sat opposite me, her vision board spread across the coffee table, her excitement palpable as she matched color swatches with potential flower arrangements. "Jonathan, what do you think about peonies for the centerpieces?" Carolyn's voice sliced through the quiet, her eyes not lifting from the collage of options. "They symbolize romance and prosperity. Perfect for a wedding, don't you think?" I looked up from my screen, my mind half stuck in a work email. "Yeah, peonies sound nice," I replied, trying to muster enthusiasm. Carolyn paused, her fingers hovering over a picture of a lush pink bouquet. "You don't sound convinced. Is there something else you'd prefer?" Her tone was a mix of curiosity and slight irritation, a common undertone these days. "It's not that," I hesitated, shutting my laptop and giving her my full attention. "It's just that I never imagined our wedding would be this elaborate." She put down the magazine, her expression shifting to concern. "I thought you wanted this to be special." "I do, but special doesn't have to mean extravagant. Remember how we used to talk about a simple beach ceremony? Just us and the people who really matter?" Carolyn sighed, leaning back against the chair, her enthusiasm dampening. "I know, but once we started planning, it felt like we had this one chance to do something memorable." Her words struck a chord. "Memorable for who, Carolyn? For our guests or for us?" I asked gently. She met my gaze, her eyes searching mine for a moment. "For both, I guess. I just want everyone to see how happy we are, how much we love each other." I reached for her hand across the table, squeezing it lightly. "We don't need a spectacle for that. Our love isn't defined by the size of our wedding, or by how many flowers we have." Carolyn's shoulders relaxed slightly, but she still seemed unconvinced. "I just thought, with everything that happened with Sherry, you'd want to make new, happier memories." The mention of Sherry tightened my chest. "Carolyn, my past with Sherry is not something we can paint over with a lavish wedding. Yes, I want to make new memories, but I want them to be true to us, not a performance." There was a long pause as we both considered our next words carefully. "Are you saying you don't want the wedding we've been planning?" Carolyn's voice was soft, vulnerable. "I'm saying I want our wedding to feel like it's ours, not like it's trying to live up to an ideal we saw in a magazine." I tried to keep my tone even, supportive. Carolyn pulled her hand away gently, looking down. "I need to think about this. Maybe we both do." As she stood and walked towards the bedroom, I called after her. "Carolyn, I love you. I just want us to be on the same page." She paused at the doorway, her back to me, and nodded slightly. "I love you too. Let's talk more tomorrow." That night, as I lay in bed next to Carolyn, I could feel the silent questions hanging in the air between us. Was our vision of happiness the same? Could I give her the dream wedding she envisioned without betraying my own sense of identity? Or were these just the first of many compromises I'd have to make? As sleep eluded me, I realized that finding balance was not about one grand gesture or a single day. It was about weaving together the strands of our individual desires into a shared tapestry of life, hoping that in the end, it would be something both beautiful and durable. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that some strands were just too different to blend seamlessly. It was supposed to be a retreat, a chance to reconnect away from the pressure of wedding plans and unspoken tensions about the future. I suggested a weekend at a quaint bed and breakfast in the mountains, hoping the change of scenery might help us find common ground. As we drove up the winding roads with the windows down, the crisp mountain air seemed to offer a temporary respite from our troubles. Carolyn had been quiet since we left, her gaze fixed on the passing landscape. "You know, this place has the best views of the sunrise over the lake," I said, trying to break the silence. "I read that it's absolutely breathtaking." Carolyn turned to me, managing a small smile. "That sounds wonderful, Jonathan. I'm glad we're doing this." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Me too. We needed this." Arriving at the bed and breakfast, we were greeted by the warm, welcoming smile of the hostess, who showed us to a cozy room with a view of the wooded mountainside. The room was charming, with rustic decor and a fireplace that added to its warmth. After settling in, we decided to take a walk along the nearby trails. The forest was peaceful, with only the sounds of crunching leaves underfoot and distant bird calls. It was beautiful, and for a moment, it felt like we could really start over. "This is beautiful, isn't it?" I asked, watching Carolyn's hair flutter gently in the breeze. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the serenity of our surroundings. "It is. I love it here. Maybe we needed to just step away for a bit." I stopped and faced her, taking both her hands in mine. "Carolyn, I know we've had our differences, especially with the wedding planning, but I want you to know that I am committed to us, to this, to making it work." She looked up at me, her expression softening. "I know, Jonathan. I am too. I just sometimes feel like—" "What is it?" I encouraged, hoping she'd open up. "I just wonder if we're really okay. Or if we're just pretending because it's easier than facing the fact that we might want different things." The honesty in her voice stung, but it was what we needed. Raw, unfiltered truth. "Let's promise each other something," I suggested. "No more pretending. If there's something on our minds, we talk about it, no matter how tough it might be." Carolyn nodded, squeezing my hands back. "I can do that. I promise." That night, we sat by the fire in the main lounge, sipping hot cocoa and playing a game of chess. It was a simple pleasure, one that reminded me of our early days when everything was new and exciting. "Remember our first date?" I chuckled as I moved my bishop. "You beat me at chess in 3 moves. I knew then I was in trouble." Carolyn laughed, her eyes lighting up with the memory. "You were so confident you'd win. I loved that about you, your confidence." "And I loved your intellect," I replied. "Still do." The game continued, and for a while, we were just Jonathan and Carolyn, not the fiancés wrestling with doubts and fears about the future. It felt like a reset, a reminder of why we fell in love in the first place. As the night drew on, we found ourselves the last guests by the fire. "It's late," I observed, though neither of us made a move to leave. "Yeah, but this is nice," Carolyn murmured, her head resting against my shoulder. "Very nice," I agreed, feeling her warmth against me. We sat there, the crackling of the fire mixing with our quiet breaths, and I realized that this weekend might not solve all our problems, but it was a start. A chance to remember what it felt like to be us before the wedding plans, before the debates about peonies or centerpieces, before the shadow of my past had darkened our future. Maybe, just maybe, this escape was the beginning of finding our way back to each other. The weekend had begun with a cautious hope, the gentle thaw of spring promising new growth. We had laughed more in those first hours than we had in weeks, But as the second day dawned, a subtle shift occurred, one that began to erode the fragile peace we had cultivated. It was Saturday evening, and the bed and breakfast hosted a small wine-tasting event in its rustic dining hall, which overlooked the sprawling vistas of the mountainside. The room buzzed with the low murmur of other guests, the clink of glasses, and the soft notes of a jazz trio in the corner. Carolyn seemed more animated, her cheeks flushed with laughter as she mingled with other guests, her earlier reservations seemingly washed away by the convivial atmosphere. I had stepped away to fetch us another round of Pinot Noir when I noticed her, deep in conversation with a man I hadn't seen before. Something about the way he leaned in, his smile a bit too knowing, his hand brushing hers as they talked, ignited a twinge of discomfort in the pit of my stomach. Returning to Carolyn, I handed her the glass, trying to mask the unease that had settled over me. "Who's your new friend?" I asked, attempting lightness in my tone. Carolyn glanced at him as he moved off to another group, her smile lingering. "Oh, that's Michael. He's here for the weekend too. Just chatting about some local hiking spots he recommends." "Seems like a friendly guy," I commented, watching Michael disappear into the crowd. "Very," she replied, her eyes briefly following him before meeting mine. "He has this adventurous spirit, kind of like you used to be when we first met." The comparison stung, unexpected and sharp. "Used to be?" I questioned, the words heavier than I intended. Carolyn's expression shifted, a flicker of irritation crossing her features before she smoothed it away. "I didn't mean anything by it, Jonathan. Just making conversation." The evening wore on, the wine flowed, and the music swelled. Yet the harmony of the night was superficial, underpinned by the growing dissonance between us. As guests started to drift away to their rooms, I suggested we do the same. Carolyn hesitated, her gaze flitting toward the group where Michael now stood alone. "You go ahead. I'll join you soon. I want to hear more about that trail Michael was telling me about." Reluctantly, I agreed, the discomfort now a tangible presence. As I headed back to our room, the echoes of laughter and lingering music followed me, the sounds mingling with a growing sense of dread. After what felt like an eternity, I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me like a second skin. I decided to go back, telling myself it was just to check on her, to put my irrational fears to rest. As I approached the now nearly empty dining hall, the soft spill of moonlight through the large windows cast long shadows, the remnants of the night's festivities. And there, in a dimly lit corner, I saw them. Carolyn and Michael, too close, their posture intimate. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I watched, unseen, as Michael leaned in and kissed her, an action she did not resist, but returned with a fervor that cut through me like a blade. I felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath me. This wasn't just friendly conversation. This wasn't innocent. It was a betrayal, plain and simple, unfolding before my eyes. Frozen, I watched for a moment longer than I could bear before stepping back, the sound of my own retreat deafening in my ears. I stumbled outside, the cool night air harsh against my burning cheeks. I needed evidence, something undeniable. Driven by a mixture of despair and anger, I returned inside, my movements quiet, my phone ready. From a distance, I captured the scene, their closeness, their evident disregard for the vows Carolyn and I were about to make. With the images secured like a weight in my pocket, I walked back to our room, each step heavier than the last. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room spinning slightly around me, the walls echoing with the ghostly laughter from earlier in the night. Carolyn returned much later, her steps light, likely believing I was asleep. As she undressed in the dark, oblivious to my wakefulness, I remained silent, a tumult of emotions raging within me. In the quiet darkness, she slipped into bed, her voice soft, perhaps sensing something amiss. "Are you awake, Jonathan?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She shifted, turning to face me. "Is everything okay?" How could it be? The question hung between us, heavy and accusing. Carolyn was silent for a moment before a quiet, What do you mean? Escaped her lips. I saw you with Michael, I said flatly, the words tasting bitter. The bed shifted as she sat up, the tension palpable. Jonathan, I don't need your explanations, Carolyn. I saw enough. Her breath caught, a soft gasp in the dark. I'm sorry, Jonathan. I never meant for... Save it, I cut her off, not wanting to hear the excuses I expected would follow. We need to talk about what this means for us in the morning. The rest of the night was a chasm of silence, each of us lost in our thoughts, the space between us filled with the enormity of what had happened. As dawn crept over the horizon, the first light casting a gray pallor over the room, the real conversation loomed, a conversation about the future, about forgiveness, and about whether what we had could possibly endure. The morning light did nothing to ease the tension that had settled between us overnight. The air in our room felt thick, charged with an uneasy silence as we both avoided the conversation that needed to happen. I got out of bed and headed to the small balcony overlooking the garden, the cool mountain air a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. Carolyn eventually joined me, wrapping her arms around herself as if to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her voice was hesitant when she finally spoke, breaking the silence that had stretched too long between us. Jonathan, about last night. I cut her off, not ready to hear her excuses or apologies. I don't understand, Carolyn. Why? My voice was steady, but the hurt was palpable, underlined by a sense of betrayal that I couldn't shake. She sighed, a sound heavy with regret. I don't know, Jonathan. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I turned to face her, my expression one of incredulous disbelief. How can you say that? You kissed him, Carolyn. How can that mean nothing? Carolyn's eyes were downcast, her voice barely above a whisper. I was feeling confused. We've been arguing so much, and he was there, and he was easy to talk to. It was stupid and thoughtless, and I'm so sorry, Jonathan. The simplicity of her admission did nothing to assuage the complexity of emotions swirling within me. Hurt, anger, disbelief, they all melded into a painful knot in my stomach. I trusted you, I said quietly, the weight of the words heavier than they sounded. I know, and I broke that. I don't expect you to forgive me right now or even understand. But I am truly sorry. Her apology hung in the air, unresolved and inadequate. I needed time to think, to process the betrayal and what it meant for us. I need some space, Carolyn. I need to think about everything. Carolyn nodded, her face pale, the lines of stress evident around her eyes. I understand. I'll give you whatever you need. I watched her walk back inside, then turned my gaze back to the garden, the beauty of it mocking in light of the ruin we were in. Later that day, I sat alone in a small cafe in the village, the images of last night playing over in my mind like a slideshow of betrayal. I pulled out my phone, the photos I had taken, a damning testimony of the moment that might very well end my relationship. Staring at them, I felt a mixture of anger and sorrow. They were proof of her indiscretion, yet they did nothing to alleviate the pain. I was scrolling through the images when my phone buzzed with a call from Carolyn. I hesitated, then answered. Jonathan, are you okay? Her voice was fraught with concern, a stark contrast to the cool morning air. I'm not sure, I admitted. I'm still trying to make sense of everything. Can we talk? Please, I think we need to sort this out face to face, she implored. I'll be back at the B&B soon, I replied, the decision weighing heavily on me. The conversation ahead would be one of the hardest I had ever faced. When I returned, Carolyn was waiting in the lounge, her posture tense, her eyes anxious. We chose a secluded corner, a private space for a conversation that felt too raw, too exposed. Jonathan, I want to make this right, Carolyn began, her voice trembling slightly. How, Carolyn? How do you make something like this right? I asked, the hurt evident in my voice. I don't know, but I want to try. Whatever it takes. Counseling, time, space, I'll do it. I love you, and I'm so sorry I hurt you, she said earnestly. I looked at her, the familiar features of her face now marred by the situation we found ourselves in. I need to think about what I want, what we have. I don't know if it can go back to what it was. Carolyn reached out, her hand hesitating in the air between us before dropping back to her side. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'm here when you're ready to talk. I nodded, the finality of the situation settling around us like a thick fog. The images on my phone, the conversation we had, none of it seemed enough to clear the air or pave a way forward. As I left her there, the divide between us felt greater than ever, a chasm widened by betrayal and filled with uncertainty about the future. The day after the betrayal felt suspended in time, each hour dragging as if unwilling to hasten the difficult decisions that lay ahead. I woke up early, having barely slept, the images of Carolyn's infidelity replaying in my mind like a relentless loop. The morning light, usually so comforting, now seemed to cast too harsh a glare on the remnants of last night's revelation. Carolyn was already up, sitting at the small table by the window with 2 cups of coffee and a somber expression. The usual morning greetings were replaced by a heavy silence that filled the room like dense fog. "I made you coffee," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper as I approached the table. I nodded, sitting down while keeping a cautious distance. "Thanks," I replied, my voice flat, the word tasting bitter as the coffee probably was. Carolyn clasped her hands in front of her, her eyes fixed on them. "Jonathan, I've been thinking all night about us, about what I've done." I sipped the coffee, keeping my gaze on the steam rising from the cup, not ready to meet her eyes. And I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't change anything or fix what I did, but I am. I was selfish and Carolyn, I interrupted, setting the cup down with a little more force than intended. Sorry isn't enough this time. I can't just brush this under the rug. What you did, it changed everything. She flinched at the hardness in my voice, a stark contrast to our usual gentle tones. I know. I don't expect forgiveness, not now. Maybe not ever. But I do want to make things right, if there's even a way to do that. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of exhaustion and disillusionment pressing down on me. How, Carolyn? How do you propose we go back to how things were? Because I can't see it. Every time I look at you now, all I see is you and him. Carolyn's eyes filled with tears, her voice cracking as she tried to speak. I would do anything, Jonathan. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes to earn your trust back. The idea of counseling, of sitting in a room and dissecting our relationship piece by piece with a stranger, seemed daunting and not entirely appealing. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can sit there and talk about us when us doesn't feel like it exists anymore. Please, she pleaded, reaching across the table, her hand stopping midair before retreating. Don't decide anything now. Think about it. Take some time. I'm here to do the work. I'm here to fight for us. I stood up, the need to put physical distance between us mirroring the emotional gap that had widened to a chasm overnight. I need some air, I said, my voice cool, detached. Jonathan, please. I'll be back later. We can talk more then, I interrupted, not trusting myself to remain composed any longer. Walking away, I felt her eyes on my back, heavy with sorrow and regret. The crisp morning air did little to clear the turmoil inside me as I wandered aimlessly around the small mountain town. Every couple I passed, every laugh and whisper of conversation felt like an assault, a reminder of what Carolyn and I might never have again. Later, as I sat on a secluded bench overlooking a quiet pond, the reality of our situation settled in with crushing finality. The images I had captured, the words we had exchanged, none of it could be undone. And as much as Carolyn pleaded for time, for a chance to make amends, the hurt was too deep, the betrayal too sharp. When I returned to the B&B, Carolyn was waiting, her face anxious, her posture tense. "Have you thought about what you want to do?" she asked, her voice hopeful yet tinged with fear. I looked at her, really looked, seeing not just the woman who had hurt me, but also the partner I had loved and shared so much with. "I think we need to go home and take some time apart," I said finally, the words feeling both foreign and necessary. "I need space to think about everything, to decide if this is something I can move past." Carolyn nodded, her expression crumbling as she absorbed my words. "Okay, if that's what you need, I'll respect that." The drive back was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our hands and hearts withdrawn. The long goodbye had begun, not with a sudden severing, but with a slow, painful retraction of heartstrings that once bound us tightly together. As the miles stretched out before us, so too did the uncertain and daunting path of either reconciliation or separation, a path we would have to walk, for better or worse. The drive back to the city was one of the longest of my life. Every mile marker seemed to pull further away from the dream we had shared and closer towards an uncertain future. We drove mostly in silence, the air between us filled with things unsaid, our minds undoubtedly replaying the same painful scenes. Once we arrived, Carolyn and I sat down in the living room, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and plans that now seemed like remnants of a different life. She was the first to break the silence. "Jonathan, I've arranged to stay with my sister for a while," Carolyn said, her voice steady but her hands visibly shaking. "I think it's best if I give you the space you asked for." I nodded, my heart heavy. "Thank you, Carolyn. I think that's wise." She stood up, looking around the room as if memorizing every detail, perhaps for the last time. "Do you think there's a way back for us, after everything?" I looked at her, the familiarity of her face now tinged with the foreignness of recent events. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I wish I could give you a definite answer, but right now, I just don't know." Carolyn bit her lip, fighting back tears. "I'll wait for you, Jonathan, for as long as it takes. I'm so sorry for everything." I watched her leave, the finality of the moment settling over me like a cold shroud. Once she was gone, the silence of the apartment was suffocating. I packed a few essentials, unable to bear the weight of shared memories that every corner of our home now carried. I needed a fresh start, or at least a new scenery to clear my mind and heal. A few days later, I found myself driving south, the sprawling cityscapes giving way to open highways. I had decided to move to San Francisco, a place we had once planned to visit together but never did. It seemed fitting to go there now, alone, as a way to reclaim my independence and perhaps rediscover who I was before my life had become intertwined with Carolyn's. Halfway there, I pulled over at a coastal overlook, the vast Pacific stretching endlessly before me. I dialed Carolyn's number, needing to hear her voice, despite everything. "Jonathan?" Her voice came through, tinged with surprise and worry. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm moving to San Francisco," I said, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. There was a pause on the line. "Is this really goodbye then?" "It looks like it might be," I replied, the words tasting bitter. "I think it's best for both of us to start fresh." "I understand," she said softly. "I really do hope you find what you're looking for, Jonathan. And if you ever need me, I'm here." "I know. Thank you, Carolyn, for everything." Hanging up, I felt a strange mix of relief and profound sadness. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel alone. Arriving in San Francisco, I rented a small apartment in the heart of the city. The hustle and bustle were a stark contrast to the quiet introspection of the drive over. I spent days exploring the city, walking without direction, letting the vibrant energy and diverse tapestry of street scenes and ocean views slowly start to mend the gaps in my heart. One evening, as I watched the sunset over the Golden Gate Bridge, a realization dawned on me, Moving here wasn't just about running away from the pain or the past. It was about moving toward something new, about growth and rediscovery. I might have come here alone, but I was not the same person who had left. The city, with its endless possibilities, seemed to whisper promises of new beginnings, of hope. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to listen. San Francisco's crisp sea salt air and rolling fog brought a sense of renewal. My small apartment, a high-rise with a view of the bustling street below and a sliver of the bay in the distance, became my sanctuary and base for rebuilding. The city, with its endless streets and diverse neighborhoods, invited exploration and promised anonymity, a chance to be just another face in the crowd, grappling with life's complexities. As weeks turned into months, I found solace in routine. Mornings were spent at a local cafe where the barista, a middle-aged man named Frank with an easy smile, soon knew my order by heart. "Mornin', Jonathan, the usual?" Frank would call out as soon as I walked in, his booming voice cutting through the morning rush. "Yeah, thanks, Frank. How's it going today?" I'd reply, appreciating the semblance of normalcy our exchanges brought. Same old, same old. Hey, you look less like you're carrying the world on your shoulders today. Things looking up?" I'd chuckle, nodding slightly. "Yeah, I think they might be." Frank's Cafe became a place not just for coffee, but for connection, grounding me in my new environment. It was here, over countless cups of coffee, that I began to piece together a vision of what my life could look like. One afternoon, I found myself at a local park, the city's skyline forming a jagged contour against the gray sky. A photography class was taking place nearby, and I watched, intrigued by the instructor's passion and the students' eagerness. Photography had always been a hobby of mine, seldom explored but never forgotten. "Interested in taking pictures?" The instructor, a woman with a keen eye and a mess of curly hair, approached me after noticing my interest. "I am, actually. Used to shoot a bit in college," I replied, my interest piqued. "Well, we're here every Saturday morning. Feel free to join us, learn to capture the city through your lens," she offered with an encouraging smile. "Thanks. I might just take you up on that," I said, considering the possibility. And I did. Saturdays morphed into my favorite day of the week, as I rediscovered my passion for photography, each click of the shutter helping me view the world, and myself, through a new perspective. San Francisco also brought new people into my life, each with their own stories. There was Mia, a fellow photographer from the class whose sharp wit matched her eye for detail. We often found ourselves lost in conversation long after the class had ended. "You really have an eye for this, you know," Mia commented one day as we reviewed some of our shots at a nearby cafe. "Thanks, Mia. It feels good to be doing something creative again. It's like seeing the world anew," I shared, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "Exactly. It's all about finding beauty in unexpected places, even in the midst of chaos," she replied, her enthusiasm infectious. As I built these new connections, my old life with Carolyn seemed to recede, becoming a chapter of my past that shaped but no longer defined me. Yet, I often wondered how she was, hoping she too was finding her path to happiness. Eventually, I reached out to Carolyn, a call prompted by a mixture of nostalgia and closure. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious but warm. "Jonathan, it's good to hear from you. How's San Francisco?" "It's been really good for me, actually. I've been taking a photography class, meeting new people. It feels like a fresh start," I explained, each word reaffirming my journey. "I'm glad to hear that, Jonathan. I've been doing some thinking, too, working on myself. It's been hard, but necessary." Carolyn's voice was reflective, and I sensed a strength in her tone that was new. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Carolyn. You deserve happiness, we both do," I said sincerely. "Thank you, Jonathan. I wish the same for you, truly." The call ended with a promise to keep in touch, perhaps as friends, perhaps as two people who once shared a life, now wishing each other well from afar. As I hung up, I looked out over the city, the lights flickering like stars against the twilight. San Francisco, with all its challenges and charms, felt like home. It wasn't just a place of new beginnings, but of continuous discovery, a reminder that even after the deepest wounds, growth and joy were possible, I was ready to embrace whatever came next, carrying with me the lessons of the past and the promise of tomorrow. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If today's story resonated with you, or if you've experienced similar challenges in your relationships, remember you're not alone. We hope this video offers some insight or comfort as you navigate your own path forward. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We value your perspectives and would love to hear your stories too. Join us next time for another profound exploration of the heart's resilience. Until then, take care and keep seeking your truth.